Harry's Wife, Part 104.11. Harry's Sob Story. In Part 104.1, Sympathy for the Spare, and 104.4, Hypocrite Harry, and 104.5, She's Made Him Unpopular, and Parts Passive, I've demonstrated the impact that Harry's wife is having upon her husband, or my husband, as she would say, her form of objectification and ownership, as a consequence of the dynamic between narcissist and intimate partner primary source that is in sustained devaluation. Not only is he having a torrid time of it, being subjected to a range of devaluing behaviours from her, it's also impacting upon him as an individual. He's not happy. He looks depressed, dishevelled. He may well be turning to drink as a method of coping. His temper comes to the fore. It's also caused him to behave like a complete and utter bell end towards friends and family, as reported in Parts Passive. So this is a very public fall from grace for Prince Harry in the affections of the public, but also just generally how he can be viewed, and demonstrates to you the impact that a narcissist has upon another person, especially where they are the intimate partner primary source. But let's turn to Rod Liddell of The Times, as he has more observations about Prince Harry. I have Harry's autobiography Spare on order, as part of the unofficial contract we journos have with the intellectually challenged ginger creature, formerly known as Prince. This contract stipulates that we will buy all Harry and Harry's wife's merch in the hope that it will provide us with further reasons to intensely dislike them. We will then hone our recently acquired slab of animus into vituperative prose directed against the ghastly couple, thereby publicising whatever it is they are flogging this week, as well as encouraging them to produce more vacuous, self-serving tribe, which again we will write about, and thus subject to the nitrous oxide of publicity. Harry's wife knows this is the deal, and it is possible that Harry is dimly aware of it too. I think they would both be a little disappointed if a hack reviewed one of the Netflix documentaries, or Harry's book, and concluded, what a compelling and insightful piece of work this is, entirely worthy of this supremely likeable twosome. Nobody ever actually says that over here, not least because neither of them is capable of real insight. We buy the stuff because we hope and expect that Harry and Harry's wife are going to say something simultaneously spiteful about the royal family and hilariously self-pitying about themselves. If they cease saying spiteful and self-pitying stuff, nobody would be remotely interested, and the bugs would end up piling up in the couple's 16 bathrooms, providing an environmentally sound alternative to Kleenex. Now, Harry's wife, were she to accept that this is how they are viewed by the press, would suffer a loss of control. She believes that everything that she has to say, and by extension what Harry has to say, is insightful, incisive, and groundbreaking. The fact that virtually everything they say and do is now viewed as either spiteful and or self-pitying would be problematic, to say the least, for Harry's wife, because it doesn't accord with the delusion that she has of herself, perpetuated by her narcissism. Rod Liddell, articulate as always, demonstrates precisely the nature of the dynamic and why they are written about. They're not written about because they're interesting. They're not written about because they're undertaking groundbreaking work. They're written about because they become almost a parody of themselves, figures of ridicule that are similarly always just going to engage in the self-pitying and spiteful behaviours. The press wait for them to engage in this. Accordingly, were Harry's wife to accept that this is how they are truly viewed, this would amount to a serious threat to control, and therefore, being told that this is how they are viewed, is not something she can accept. I know many times people ask me, can she not see HG? Can she not see how she comes across? And the short answer is no, she cannot. Because if for a moment, by some strange quirk of the universe, her narcissism fell away and allowed her to see and accept what she was being spoken about, she would essentially collapse into some pile of dust. If she were given that insight, it would be like water being thrown over the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. It would eventually finish her off. She doesn't have the means of coping with criticism, whether merited or not. Now, nobody likes to be criticised, but many people recognise where a criticism is done constructively, sometimes where it's justified. And even if they don't like it, they can admit to themselves, well, I kind of deserve that. The best thing I can do here is just remain quiet and remove myself, rather than going berserk. In some instances, someone may disagree with a criticism, and they'll have a discussion about it, and will do so in a reasonable fashion. But the narcissist cannot accept criticism, because criticism threatens that sense of control. And therefore, the narcissism, as its self-defense mechanism, has to ensure that that threat to control, which manifests through criticism, is nullified. If the narcissism doesn't exist, the narcissist, without the shield of narcissism, would find themselves unable to respond, cope, and deal with the criticisms that came their way. They would essentially collapse. And the narcissism is there to defend the narcissist against these criticisms. And it does so by always ensuring they're never accepted, that they have no justification, that even if they're accurate, well, it's not my fault because you made me do this, or X caused me to do it, or it was a full moon that night and that's why I behaved in the way that I did. It's always somebody else's or something else's fault. And that is done to quash the threat to control that's posed by the criticisms. She is not allowed insight, as Rod Liddell states early on in the article. They have none. Him, because he's essentially thick and he's caught up in the shared fantasy. Her, because her narcissism will never, ever, ever allow it. No matter how many times you would sit down with her, and no matter how many videos, magazine articles, newspaper articles, broadcast news, results of a poll, videos of her own behaviour, and point out, you did this, you did this, you did this, this is what people see, this is what people say about you, her narcissism will never ever accept it. There'll always be a reason, an excuse, an explanation to get rid of it, and a lot of the time it'll be, you're only saying about me because you're racist, a hater, a misogynist, you don't understand me, you don't know me. Her narcissism is set to reject any and all criticisms in whatever way that it can do so in order to preserve her existence. And that's why she can never, ever understand what she is, because the narcissism just will not let it happen. It's exasperating for the victims of a narcissist, because until you come across my work and realise that it's entirely futile trying to get that person to see what they're doing, you might as well be speaking to them in a foreign language, because they simply don't understand what you're saying. They're not being deliberately obtuse. The narcissism causes them to not understand, because it has to do so in order to defend them. Returning to what Mr. Liddell has to say, I've read the blurb. I'm told that, with its raw, unflinching honesty, Spare is a landmark publication full of insight, revelation, self-examination, and hard-won wisdom about the eternal power of love over grief. Yeet. I sincerely hope it isn't, although I expect that the self-examination runs to several hundred interminable pages. We are also informed that the Ginge is a husband, father, humanitarian, military veteran, mental wellness advocate, and environmentalist who resides in Santa Barbara, California, with his family and 3 dogs. Finally, Harry tells us that it is an interesting story because he has worn many hats over the years, both literally and figuratively, which made me worry briefly that this would be a book solely about Harry's favourite hats, those he liked and those he felt were less attractive, which would, in my view, be an account which risked teetering into tedium, even if it keeps his dad happy. The Sussex rumour mill, meanwhile, has suggested that, since the Queen's funeral, Harry has been busy striking out of his text stuff like Camilla, that horrid old racist ratbag who kept dobbing my dad while Mum wasn't looking, and Dad doesn't just talk to plants, he takes detailed instructions from them, and so forth. I hope this rumour is wide of the mark, otherwise it's 13 quid down the Swanee. But as I say, Harry knows the contract, and even if he doesn't, his publishers do. Much as do the executives at Netflix. There has to be the intimation of bile directed at his old family, however vapidly expressed, otherwise his new family will lose a lucrative source of income and sink into a kind of D-list celeb obscurity, which is roughly where Harry's wife resided before he popped the question. In a sense, this is Harry's only real tragedy, and one that he has created for himself. His continued existence in the public eye is exclusively predicated upon him being a sullen counterpoint to the rest of the royal family. Without that, what could he possibly have to tell us all? And yet, by the same token, the more and more estranged he becomes from the Windsors, the less impact his whining revelations carry. So the temptation will be to up the condemnations of both the institution and the individual members of it to compensate for that inevitably growing sense of distance. He seems destined to become a kind of mirror image of Harry's wife's father, seething with anger and ready for a damaging quote every time Oprah or CNN wander along desperate to portray our country as a nation of colonialist bigots. Harry's disaffection with the monarchy has a lot more purchase with the dim-witted liberals in the United States than it does over here, where the overwhelming majority of people are not in the least bit sympathetic to the formerly royal couple. He can survive on that for a while, although with ever-diminishing returns. He called his book Spare because of his subordinates to his brother in the royal rankings. But when used in my neck of the woods, in the north of England, Little writes, it can also mean either angry or mentally deficient. I don't suppose he knew that. So a decent dissection of Harry's behaviour, and also showing quite where he's ended up as a consequence of the behaviour of his wife. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.